I totally agree um, look, I'd felt for a long time that ethics is an afterthought. It's a luxury. It's something that only very it takes a lot of you need a lot of people with a lot of money to actually filter out enough cash to support uh, sort of philosophers and ethicists. And very clearly we're not there yet in psychedelics.
Well, welcome back to Epic Inspire, where we talk about psychedelic issues as well as issues that are relevant to the public and that intersection. You're one of your co-hosts, Dr. Sandra Dreisbach, and with me is Dr. Sam Douglas. And today we're going to talk about money, 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 and ethics and ethical issues. It seems kind of obvious, but strangely enough, like money doesn't get enough of a focus point in terms of how it interplays with ethics and ethical issues in this space. There's a lot of conversation about Indigenous reciprocity, not that that shouldn't get more attention. Issues around, how we conduct ourselves in practice, but looking at the financial pinnings and underpinnings and how it causes different issues in the space, and maybe even the root of a lot of ethical problems in the space, a lot of ethical challenges that we don't really necessarily point to as a money issue. And I'll let Sam chime in, but I'll start us off by saying, like, for example, and you can say, like, maybe this is just too personal to you, Sandra, but like I filed for bankruptcy last year, and and it's not because I don't have financial knowledge and wisdom. It's that I haven't yet found a way to be sustainable in the psychedelic space and work on ethics full time. And I thought maybe you could say I was deluded in thinking that maybe I could, that the industry would be built enough that it would be able to help sustain the work of like Epic, and the work Sam and I do individually as well as in the community. But I have to say, like, I'm having to pivot now, not just out of accountability, but also just in recognition that this is a real issue and it's caused me to be at risk of ethically compromising myself, but also the entire space. It points to the fact that the entire space is not oriented towards ethical relationship with finances and money, whether we're talking about Indigenous reciprocity and contribution, or we're talking about actually putting our money where our mouth is about ethics and contributing back to the community in the places we need it if you want it to exist. So, so was that too much of a loaded gun to start you off with?
No, no, not at all. I just, I have a range of points about that. I, maybe organize them for a second. Look, yeah, I think that's right. Look, money is always an issue. I think just inherently, but I think there are a range of uh, points about money and finance in psychedelics, both above ground and underground, but especially above ground and kind of grey area practices. Really, yeah, it's almost hard to know where to start. I totally agree um, look, I'd felt for a long time that ethics is an afterthought. It's a luxury. It's something that only very it takes a lot of you need a lot of people with a lot of money to actually filter out enough cash to support uh, sort of philosophers and ethicists. And very clearly we're not there yet in psychedelics. So it is kind of that, but it's also that yeah, there's a lot of things going on in that are center around money. Part of it is, I think, that a lot of us had perhaps a false impression of just the amount of money that psychedelics and psychedelic adjacent uh, services and businesses and so forth were going to actually generate. I don't think that's really eventuated. I think a lot of people have had to work very hard. People who do have a viable niche have had to work extremely hard to carve it out. Uh, and those are, and that's even for people who are possibly more willing to compromise ethically than say we are. Yeah, it's I think it's a difficult time, difficult sort of situation to be
It's
in.
a
But
challenging
yeah,
time for everyone. I mean, like, and financially and economically in the world, right? Um, and we're not even gonna, not at least not today, talk about the war and financial impacts and things like that, and different attentions and shifts. But I think it's just, I mean, maybe I should talk about the Indigenous reciprocity issue a little bit more in relation to this, because it was one of those places where, like, I would hear people give the lip service to it and say it's really important, right? And say it's a priority and be committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? Even to the point of maybe even forcing certain boards to look a particular way because it looked equitable or it looked diverse or it looked like it had Indigenous community involvement. And I can't speak for Indigenous communities. Um, but how many of them were actually giving a percentage of their funds towards that effort? How many training programs were giving money back? How many were giving money forward, right, to building sustainable practices, to building a sustainable ecosystem? And I think ethics, is just, one part of that puzzle, that everyone wants to say that they're ethical. Not everyone is willing to cut out a portion of their funds or to make sure that the certain amount of training or have the accountability in there. And again, that's another piece that costs money. It costs money to take time to make accountability practices, to review practitioners that are in there. And to your point, I suppose, like, this sort of overground, underground sort of aspect, right? There's a lot of expensive training programs out there that you spend a lot of money to train, like you would, like, let's say, in any sort of specialization, like, like a coaching certification or psychology or others. And yet there's not evidence, as far as I know it, that investment, that financial investment, will turn into an actual job that will sustain you. And there's a certain financial irresponsibility by many programs anyone who charges any money to train people, to have a certain amount of accountability that that is actually going to result in a benefit towards the person who they're training, not just terms of the process of education. Obviously, you and I both value education. We've gotten a lot of education, always learning, always growing. And I'm not saying anything wrong with any of the programs. I'm saying that you have a responsibility to your students, to the people you're training, that they're going to be able to make, at least some sort of degree of benefit in their workforce, in their work, by having spent that investment, right? It's
yeah.
an investment.
I think it's
So
part of like certainly here, when most places, virtually everywhere where you find training programs around psychedelics, none of them are particularly regulated. Um,
yeah, none of them are. I mean, are
because
any of
very
them really regulated? I mean,
well,
really, like.
very few of them are a part of established universities or whatever.
Yeah, some have
So,
some associations with some accredited
but even then, that doesn't really
programs.
mean much because cynically, because you and I have both been inside the
Yeah, I've gone through
university
lots of
system
trainings.
and lots of trainings, but we've both been on the other side of as worked for universities, worked for educational institutions, and know full well that in the short term, universities in particular, I don't know if it happened much in the US. Certainly, it used to happen a lot in Australia, where universities would pick up on something that had become extremely glamorous. And it
Right.
was like the example
Let's
here
say
from
AI right now, like, oh,
well
you
AI
everyone has
right
to have
now,
an
but
AI class, and AI
well
training, and AI
AI
education.
training, but in well, you went back to say back in the old days, back in
What are the
say
old days?
the turn of the century, uh, when crime shows, CSI, Silent Witness, all these shows had made being a forensic pathologist extremely sexy. And
Right.
so a number of universities in Australia decided to offer
Forensic science.
forensic
Yeah.
science.
Yeah.
And they ran these, pumped, vast numbers of students through them because they were high demand, and because they were high demand, people would pay a lot to do them, but it was also prestige for the universities. Lots of reasons why universities would want to do this. And then at the end of them, suddenly, most of the students discovered that actually, you know what? There's not that many jobs in actual, like, as forensic scientists, forensic pathology. There's actually very few jobs in it, particularly in a country as safe as Australia. It's like, we're gonna do forensic pathology. It's like we don't actually we have a relatively low crime and murder rate here. So like, most students, a lot of students who'd done these degrees didn't end up working in the field at all, or they ended up working in very unglamorous, sort of jobs,
Yeah.
as end up basically working as morticians, or
Right,
like,
right, right.
it
Related
wasn't what
fields,
they thought
not
it would be.
directly to what they were trained in.
Yeah, and
Philosophers
then,
wouldn't know anything about that.
they wouldn't know anything about that if they ended up in something adjacent at all. And then very quietly, most universities, all but the most prestigious universities, just quietly phased out those degrees, because once
Yeah.
students realized, once it became public knowledge that actually, this is an amazingly long, hard process to get through this degree, and it wasn't going anywhere that you wanted it to, then eventually the institutions moved on. And this has happened repeatedly outside of kind of core areas, that universities offer. So a really common thing for institutions to do. And it kind of feels like it's the same pattern here, is that you will have people, because certainly has been the case that, sometimes it's kind of a rebranding. It looks like a completely new institution, but some of the people who are associated with it have also, previously
Yeah,
been,
I've definitely seen that.
associated with other training programs. But yeah, it's
And
something.
even ones that were
Yeah.
associated with actual harm in the space. That's one of the things that gets me, but not that we can go down
Yes.
this rabbit hole right
Not.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think one of the things you bring up, right, is that in some ways this problem is non-unique, right? Because it happens in other fields and other disciplines, having people chase the buck, having a sort of gold rush and prospecting out or whatever's popular. And people do it even like, on things like platforms like we're on right now, right? Well, they'll search terms for whatever people are searching for, and then just create content that serves it, to make money. That gets that sort of mere means to an end sort of mindset. And maybe that's part of what I'm criticizing and wanting to highlight about the finance and ethics pieces is, like, for instance, in our space, like one of the things that were popular to get training on was microdosing. So then there's like a whole wave of microdosing training. And this is all, in full disclosure, I have trained in people in microdosing programs. I have trained people in regular facilitation programs. I have trained people in workshops. I am definitely a part of this, and I've received financial benefit from that. But and maybe this gets into another aspect that we can point to, is that a lot of the financial even reimbursement for people who have education training to pass on, it's a sort of one and done, right? So the institution or organization will like hire you or me or something like that to do a couple hours of a workshop or a talk on ethics or something to be one of the talking heads in a series, right? And we'll get money for that one thing, but we won't get anything else after that.
No, that's right. And partly this is just not negotiating, not being, maybe it's we could have negotiated better deals on this. There's a number of things where I've helped people write course material, and then, I have a one-off fee for doing that, and then they
And you didn't
just,
even get credit for some of it.
yeah,
You're
not
don't even
always,
know that
and
people don't even know
don't.
that it was you. They think it's the
That's
person
right.
who's running the company.
That's right. So,
It's
you have things like this, but also you have, but being the talking head thing, which is really common now, it's like you gave your talk on your part of this training program. Universities are moving more in that way, but the thing is that for real institutions, I'm going to just straight out say it, real educational institutions don't do that, because
That's
students
right.
by and large, students and their parents who are paying for everything don't accept that you're gonna have a 4-year degree where it's just recorded videos by someone who you got them to record the video and then you fired them. But nor do university staff particularly accept this. And certainly in Australia, universities are still one of the most heavily unionised workplaces
Right, and we're
in
saying that we're
in
not
the country,
unionized,
and
for sure.
are very resistant to that. So it's because universities would they would, if they could, basically fire all the academics, as many as they could, and just use the recorded lectures from last year. But this is the problem: is that then they're not up to date, and it's just not as like, again, because it's less regulated, or because the people who are doing, I don't want to blame customers,
I'm not trying to blame anyone with the
but
system.
also
I mean,
that
the
there's
fact
just
is you
a
can use
lower
recordings.
expectation, or
You
I
can
don't
use
know.
recordings,
Yeah,
and this is the thing. It's not so much that you get the one-off payment, right? I mean, obviously, like you're saying, it's not like how real, like, primary, universities, institutions work, because they can't sustain business that way, because then eventually we wouldn't, work for them, right? Because we need to be able to make a living, otherwise they wouldn't have us available, right? Um, and, uh, and it, and it's funny because, like, at first this didn't get to me so much, the fact, but like, and some companies, that I have contributed to, are offering me percentages on whenever they show the recording again. They offer it again, they do it again, I will get a percentage of the company or the business, or the resale. But more times than not, sometimes they'll say that, and then nothing will ever happen. Or they don't put in the contract about having use to the recordings, and then they'll make use of the recordings, and they will make money every single time they sell it, but they're not paying the people who gave that thing. And you may be okay with, like, white privileged me not getting that money, maybe. But it hit me a little harder when I saw a lot of BIPOC and Indigenous community members who were giving their knowledge and wisdom, also doing a recording, also getting paid for a one-off, and then having their stuff extracted and reused over and over again, and making it look like they have that relationship, when really what they've done is they've done the worst of all possible worlds. They've made it look like they have that. They have given some money, but the reality is that they've actually ended up extracting from their knowledge and wisdom and not giving them the proper reciprocity. It's been a criminal exchange, not an actual fair or abundance exchange in the relationship. So we're not the only ones, but if it basically, like, and the students aren't the only ones. So maybe the question, as we can try to, have this be a shorter conversation, who is making money? Is there money in the psychedelic space? Should there be more investors in this space? Or is you hear about, multi-billion or $1 billion. Is the only money if you're either selling product, or if you are um, making a new product, right? Like going
yeah.
biopharmaceutical, right?
Well, look,
Or doing the conference circuit, and running conferences, and gathering huge email lists, and running a mega conference, and gathering, thousands of dollars for your entrance fee.
yeah. Well, look, the conference circuits. I think you have to charge a lot to make money off those. Having just been to, like
Yeah, it is.
a big
It is.
conference late
It is a
last
lot
year,
to
which
spend,
was,
and
which which was like a really big undertaking. I hope my friend Ronnie won't mind me saying is that, like, the EGA Garden States Conference, for example, which is like pretty much the premier psychedelic conference in Australia, it doesn't make a lot of money.
yeah.
It doesn't generate a lot of profit. I mean, it is a non-profit, like it's run by a non-profit organization, but the event itself, by the time you've paid everyone who needs to be paid for their work to contribute to it, there's not actually much left over from ticket sales. It's so that the which is okay, but it is also like it's also quite a lean operation. Like they use as many volunteers as they can, so you have to charge a lot to make money off it, and the more you charge, the more exclusionary the
Right. It
conference
then becomes
becomes.
non-equitable.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right. So you're already
Um,
charging people. They're already charging people as little as they can, and then just trying to get this, event across the line because it's a good thing just in and of itself. So it is hard, and that has issues. I think in terms of who has money, and where the money is being made. Look, I'm really deeply cynical about biotech and pharmaceutical stocks in the psychedelic space by and large. I don't think they really even, like, what are the chances that most of these things are ever going to make it to market? You make most of your money at this stage. Most of the money is being made out of speculation that maybe one of them will.
And for what's worth, again, non-unique, right? The pharma industry, like there's way more money spent in research than you do in actual products. Part of the market in the R&D for pharma is that you're going to have to spend a lot of money on medicines that don't actually end up working or have a toxicity or whatever, that they're going to have a certain amount of fallout.
Well, the
But
difference is that it's
there's
not the
tons of
whole.
new things that are being developed.
There are tons of new things, but in mainstream pharmaceuticals, it's not the whole sector. They still make a lot of money off actually selling actual product. You look at the
Yeah.
companies that are selling, the companies that are actually the publicly listed ones, at least, who make money because they sell, GMP grade psilocybin or MDMA, like, medical grade, uh, you know, drugs for actual above ground therapy. You look at those; they're not making a lot of money. In fact, I know more than a few of them who manufacture these drugs are actually, limping along, taking terrible loans in order to actually keep extending their runway, in the hope that at some point a large market will open up for them. So it's like this isn't like big mature companies that are making money from selling Ozempic or Tylenol or whatever. Like, this is about you have companies struggling along who actually sell a tiny amount of product, because again, as I've said in the past, the amount of MDMA, for example, that's required to service the actual above ground legal market for MDMA is tiny. Tiny. There's more MDMA at a decent sized music festival, so
Which, by the way,
it's
test your substances.
test your substances,
Federal
yes.
contamination is real. Other substances are
But at
there.
least
Yeah.
the legal market is tiny. So most of the money at the moment is from people speculating on whether or not someone's going to get, whether on is Atto Beckley going to get their 5-MeO DMT nasal spray to work. And if they get it to work, and it does look good, and honestly, as a sidebar, it sounds awesome from what I've read from the trial, sort of experience from it, sounds lovely. But is it going to work? Is it going to get through the FDA approval process? And then when it gets to market, is it going to, actually, are you actually ever going to sell much of it? And when you do sell much of it, are you going to make any money? And it's not clear, and that's a good bet. That's one of the front runners for things. But I wouldn't be, if someone said, would you stake your life on this product going to market? Absolutely fucking not. Not in a million years.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's one of the good ones. So you're kind of thinking, like, most of the money at the moment is from people. We're doing this here. The company, we're doing a thing. People lob millions or sometimes even billions of dollars at it. And it's mainly just like the people who have a lot of money, who invested very early. They're still going to get out of this okay, because they got the shares so cheap it doesn't really matter. As long as they cash out before it nosedives completely, they will have done fine out of it. It's the retail investors, all the poor people on the shroom stocks Reddit and subreddit, who are true believers, or sort of think that it's an investment opportunity. They're the ones who are going to be left holding the bag with a bunch of shares that aren't actually worth anything if none of this stuff ever actually goes to market. Because eventually, if none of these products succeed, then the companies won't be worth anything. So there is money at the moment, but my firm opinion is that it's predominantly based on speculation. These are all meme stocks. They're not actually worth anything. They've got, and they never talk about it properly anyway. They're always talking about, you always know that there's something weird going on when they pitch their stocks or their potential products to investors, they
Uh-huh.
talk about things like how many this that there's millions of people suffering from treatment-resistant depression, around the world.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Well,
the problems that are trying to be solved are very real and do have significant
well, they
financial
do,
impact.
but it's how you present them, because it's like, well, there's millions of people who have depression, even just in the US. So, but then how?
Absolutely.
But then every time when you're going from that total potential, what would you say, the total addressable market, the absolute maximum number of people who could possibly make use of your product, as you get closer to reality, that number gets smaller and smaller and smaller, because how many of them would actually use it, and then how many of them have the money, and then how many of them have insurance, and then so even if it gets through, even if the product goes to market, then it's not going to be bought by millions of people. It's going to be bought by maybe tens of thousands. So again, it's this thing where the money encourages people to put their best foot forward and present it really
I mean, like, that's why
optimistically.
before this call, we were talking about, like, Oregon, right? And all the money and investment people went into training and building up the programs, but it's literally a new government office for Oregon, and so they have to create licensing fees in order to help that office exist, right? And then people have to pay $1,000 for a session, right? And that's a good deal, right? In terms of, but, like, we don't have the insurance providing yet. We don't have or at least very limited, about that. And and we've had more and more of these businesses now going under because the financial pressures are still there, right? Especially in the economy, at least here in the US. Um, but it's not. I mean, and maybe I want to leave on an optimistic note. I mean, I know we need to wrap up now, but uh, and I guess, well, one thing I wanna say is, like, some of the things that we wanna spend money on ethically or for harm and risk reduction aren't done not because people don't think it's important. They're not done because they don't feel like they have the money and the resources to provide it. Um, and when they are provided, either they're being provided by volunteers or by people donating, other resources, right? Like what happens at Burning Man, people are primarily donating their time in order to do the harm reduction.
Which
If you have
is cool,
events, a
but
lot of
also
them
in
don't have risk reduction or stuff that's there for support, but some of them do, and when you have ones that they have like a death that occurs, right? But and from mismanagement, and so, like, the risk is really high, so they need insurance, right, which also costs money, and we can't really go into the whole insurance thing right now, right? So we have the high risk, um, which also has greater costs with, a newer and developing above ground market, um and people wanting to go into the sort of gold rush of it and wanting to be ethical. I think predominantly people do want to do good ethical practice. They want to be fiscally responsible. They want to give back to the communities appropriately. But, the reality is that we do not have the appropriate funding and resources currently to create an ethical psychedelic space.
Yeah, that is it. It's the harm reduction organizations, yeah, um rely entirely on, they're all volunteers and donations are what keep them running. Which, as a side note, can I say something like Burning Man, the amount of money that is at
It's not a
Burning
really
Man,
fun thing. Yeah.
it's like the net worth of every attendee at Burning Man, and your people doing harm reduction are volunteers. Like,
Right, I mean, they
come on
and I think
now,
this gets into
this
more of a
is
social commentary, right?
yeah,
Because, like,
yeah,
it's not that there isn't money, it's how we're distributing that money and resources,
right.
and we've been creating a toxic ecosystem because of how we've been distributing the money and resources in the psychedelic space, but also in society. Um, and maybe that's where maybe that's where we should end. Do
We should
better,
just leave it at
everyone.
that.
I'm gonna try and do better. I'm trying to do better with being my own financial responsibility. I'm trying to be more accountable. I know Sam's trying to be more accountable too. You can speak for yourself though.
Yeah, 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 totally trying to make it, be more, yeah, more accountable, and more, and have my work be more sustainable.
Yeah, and growing at not just the speed as trust, but at the way that we can resource it responsibly, right? Maybe we need
Yeah,
to add on to that expression. It's like, look, if you cannot do it ethically or responsibly, then maybe you should slow down,
yeah.
or
Well,
or
that's
maybe
right.
you
Like
should
this
think
is the
about how
thing.
we're distributing those resources.
Yeah, look, this is a thing. Like if you're starting a particularly, I guess it's bad enough if it's enough when it's a non-profit. It's enough when it's a charity
Yeah,
and you're not and you're relying on volunteers because you're doing what needs to be. What is you're doing something that's good and you do this because this is the only way to do it. No one, there isn't the money to actually do it, but you only do this because you have to. It's kind of being you're forced in this position because you have no other choice. But particularly if you're running a business, whether it's a sort of a for-profit or a non-profit or like a public benefit corporation or something like that. Like if you're making money, then if you're trying to run something that makes money, but you can't afford to do reciprocity properly, you can't afford to pay your workers properly, or that kind of thing, then you probably just you're not ready to be doing
you're
what you're
not
trying to
ready.
do. Yeah.
You're not ready,
Um,
and I think that's it. I think, I mean, when I was teaching business ethics, I taught a lot of business ethics, especially when I was teaching at San Jose State versus at UC Santa Cruz. Uh, that I would always sound like, good ethics is good business, and it's not sustainable in the long run. It may be sustainable in the short run to be able to run by the fumes of your pants without, like, not thinking about reciprocity, or without thinking about sustainability, or without thinking about, ethics or accountability in your business or in your practices. But in the long run, it is not going to create the world we want. It's not gonna create the sort of psychedelic communities that we want.
it
It's
doesn't
not gonna
work.
create the healing that we are
Yeah.
aiming for with these medicines.
Well, look, I think it's without speaking to people's intentions because, I don't want to mind read people, but I will say that this is, the way that I used to teach business ethics was essentially reflects that. And where we used to talk about stakeholder analysis, we would talk about the fact that, like, people who are affected by your decisions, your business decisions, you might not think they matter, but if you upset them enough, they will, they will, they will make it matter to them, and they'll make it matter to you because they will inconvenience you greatly. They will they will ruin your social media feeds. They If you really upset people,
Yeah, the
they'll
cancel
start
culture.
we'll
Maybe
get
that should be our
cancel
next
culture.
topic.
Well, or they'll do things like they will start lobbying their local government to curtail your business activities if you upset people enough. And this is a real thing and part of the difference. I mean, businesses are never great at this at the best of times. Again, this is not a unique problem, but I feel that like psychedelic businesses at times seem to be almost uniquely resistant to the idea that they need to care about their stakeholders. That they care. It's just it's that strain of that school of thought where all we need to care about are our shareholders, and everyone else can you know go jump in the lake. But real life's not actually like that,
That's right.
and organizations, people are stubborn. Organizations find this out all the time, but they can't seem to assimilate this lesson. It's like, why does everyone hate us so much? I'm like, you know,
Yeah, and and I wanna talk more. This is actually a really rich topic.
yeah, sorry.
Sorry, that just slipped out. But I'm really glad that we're talking about it. If you're listening to this and you have any thoughts, go ahead and put it in the comments. Let us know, if there's topics you think we should talk about, things that you think are interesting, or if you'd like us, we're going to try and switch it up between doing general conversations and going some diving deep. So next time we're probably going to dive deep onto something more in particular. So stay tuned, and thank you for taking the time to be inspired by Epic and our conversations. Much love.